And I'm just very excited that Patty Prasada-Rao is with us tonight. Patty is a community development practitioner from Baltimore, Maryland. As everybody knows, Cover has always been uniquely open academic association that welcomes practitioners as well as academics into full membership. Recently, my husband Keith and I have begun a project to showcase the work of practitioners around the globe who are applying mimetic theory to the problems of rivalry, violence, and scapegoating in their communities. And we're calling this new venture Unrival, a network for discoveries in nonviolence. And Patty is exactly the type of practitioner we're hoping to connect with. Someone for whom the mimetic insights about rivalry and violence makes sense in the context of her work in community development. So I'm just really excited that Patty accepted my invitation to talk about these videos as an invitation to change makers, to really reach out to people who are not in academia, but who are working for peace and nonviolence in their communities. And I'm really looking forward to Patty's comments tonight. Thank you so much, Patty, for being here.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you to Raven and Cover for the invitation. I suspect that of all of the people on this call, and maybe those who will watch it online later, that I am probably one with the baby understanding of mimetic theory and Girardian understanding of his theories. But as I have come to learn about them, I felt like many other people have said that their eyes were open to how this can be applied to so many things, and especially to the work that I do. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about myself, that it was a little bit hard to answer Suzanne as to what title. In our culture, we actually usually say something about what the work is that we do, and that defines how we introduce ourselves. In my culture, I am South Asian Indian. You introduce yourself by what family you belong to. It is not by what you do or what your profession is that first creates your identity. And so I wanted you to know that I am a South Asian Indian, first generation born in the U.S. And that has influenced how I see the world and how I understand things, understanding and hearing the stories from my parents, coming from India, knowing that my grandfather was born in 1907 in the untouchable caste as a Hindu, and what he saw transpire in his life. Knowing that my family came to know Christianity through the work of missionaries, Western missionaries, who often came with the colonized idea of how to share theology, and the impact that that had on my family. So there are a lot of things that come to who I am. The other thing that you need to know about me is, well, that I suspect is that I may be, because all I can see are the panelists, I can't see the attendees. I may be one of the few people of color on this call and those who are attending. And I want you to know that I understand that. I don't take that lightly. I also think it's important to say that I don't speak for all people of color. And as a person who is not African American, not Black, I don't speak for folks in my community, but I come tonight to share some thoughts and to ask questions, perhaps on their behalf and on behalf of others like me. I first heard about Renee Girard when I was invited to speak at a Theology and Peace conference. And it was in 2015. Now, that year might not mean as much to you all, but to me, the time of the Theology and Peace conference happened just a mere few months after the death of Freddie Gray. Freddie Gray was a young man who was a community resident in my neighborhood and died under the hands of the police. And it sparked off a civic unrest in my neighborhood, in my community, in our city. And I'm sure that many of you saw the CVS burning and heard the comments of many people. We went through a very difficult time in our neighborhood. And in learning and reading about mimetic theory, I felt like just everything I was reading, I saw the application to what was happening in my community. In particular, I saw a way to help understand or explain or get insight into the relationship between members of my community and the police, and a feeling of being the oppressed with the oppressor, the subdominant culture to the dominant culture, the marginalized to those who have power. And I believed that there was a way that mimetic theory could help us, and could help us to push forward to thinking about the solutions to addressing some of these issues. I do still believe that, um, but I'm coming tonight, I think, to encourage what Suzanne had said at the beginning, is trying to find new ways to tell the story, and how to reach more people, and how to have the mimetic theory meet this moment. Um, Billy, you said, there's an insight in mimetic theory to what's really going on now. And we're asking the question of, how do we help others know what matters, and how can understanding about mimetic theory help address what's happening? I I I believe that in some of the answer to that question of how, from a perspective of my community, I think that one of the things that will help is to address what are the barriers. And I'm sure that you all have asked yourselves those questions. What are the barriers of bringing something from an academic perspective to a practitioner's perspective? What are the hurdles of bringing something that may be thought through in its origin by older white men, perhaps, and I'm making some assumptions and understanding here, to people who are not that? What are the ways to help people see into the truth, see into the fact that this could have something to do with me, that it could have something to do with our issues? I would venture a guess that if I told many people in my neighborhood that I was going to be on this panel, and they asked me what it was about, I'd probably get a lot of blank stares back from them. And it would take me a while to explain to them why I actually think that there's something here for us. And in that, I think, is where the challenge lies of how do we help translate that? I do believe that the arts are a way that we can communicate, where theory, thought, writing, from an academic perspective, may not communicate as well. I also would say that I think, from the going to the Theology and Peace conference, there were a number of times, and the second conference that I went to was in 2016. And we were focused in particular on violence in communities and policing. And one of the speakers at that conference talked about two ways of looking at it, with violence and with blessing. And because I'm showing my baby understanding of the theory, please forgive me with the way I may say things, which might not be correct. But in that, and I looked back through my notes, I found that there were words on the violence side that were conflict, competition, closed, acquisitive, death-oriented, with no choice. And there were words on the blessing side that were reconciliation, collaboration, generative, generous, life-oriented, with choice. And that desire can be seen in both of those columns, that there's a desire that's imitative, and that leads to the competition, and then ultimately to the scapegoating, and that there may be a desire that can lead to following and serving and community, and then mercy, forgiveness. And the one will lead ultimately to violence and destruction, and the other could lead to shalom and justice and restoration. And I believe that if you wanted to come to my community to talk about these issues, we actually know a lot on that side of the violence side that leads to destruction. We know a lot about what leads to competition and conflict. If you talk about the turf issues and the cliques what other people call gangs, in my community. Um, and I think that there is a way that my neighbors would understand that part of mimetic theory. Um, but I don't know that they would care that much to delve more and more into that, because we get it. That's what we face with. That's what we are dealing with all the time. I think what would get people in my community to care about it is, so what? Like, what difference does it make? What impact could it have on getting us out of what we already know? What does it have to do with me? And how can understanding this from a mimetic theorist framework help us to get to that place of restoration and resolution and shalom? And I believe that in that, one of the things that I would say to you all is, in figuring out how to communicate more to communities like mine, I believe that that you all have folks in your circles who come from communities like mine, who understand mimetic theory, who are Black, who are of minority, who are people for whom this reality lives in them, and mimetic theory does. And I think that they will be part of your key. I believe that even in the arts and in the story and in the film and in the dance, getting the input from those folks would be important. I had a chance, we had a panelists call earlier, and I had a chance to ask Billy about something in the film, The Problem is the Solution, about the use of dark-skinned individuals to represent Adam and Eve and Jesus. And I tried to ask a couple of folks I know, who people of color, how they reacted to that, how they responded. And I got a mixed response. Some people thought it was amazing and beautiful, and some people had some questions of why was that done. And that's okay. We're not all going to react to something the same way. But I would say to Cover and to Raven, if you are wanting to reach communities like mine, then I think that part of your process will involve including the communities with you in that. And I think that some of the folks in my neighborhood would want to know, do we matter? Do we have something to contribute to it? Or is it only what you have to contribute to tell us? I don't believe that's what it is. It's only you telling us, but sometimes it feels that way. And so how do you include us to feel like we have something to offer? That we are players at the table, not only receivers of something that you are sharing with us. And what is it that helps us to know that our input and that we matter? We need this. Do you need us? Do we need each other? And how do we demonstrate that? I'll come back to something just as I close. When I talked about my grandfather, my grandfather shared many stories about the caste system and what happened when independence came to India. And I had the privilege, when my grandfather was turning 96, of living in his village for 8 months and helping with a school our family started. And my grandfather and my family from America, he had moved to the States. He came and visited while I was living there, and we took a walk in his neighborhood, in his community. And as we walked down this one street, he turned to us grandkids and he said, when I was a young boy, I wasn't allowed to walk on this street. And as he walked, because he was an elder in the community, people started coming out onto their little doorways. And this one man invited my grandfather into his house and wanted to show him something in his house. He was also an elderly man. When we left that gentleman's house, my grandfather said that he was a high caste person, and that my grandfather in the older days would never have been permitted to, to, to enter into his door. And my grandfather said to all of us grandkids, and he did not speak with anger. He did not speak with even lament about what had happened and what that meant for generations of Indians and his family. He spoke with hope. And he spoke that, see, this shows that change can happen. Things can be different, and you all are a part of that. And so I take that as part of my call of life to say that hope is what I'm holding on to. And that, as my grandfather said, that I can be a part of helping that, and being a part of making that change come true, wherever I am and in whatever groups I am with. And so, as I close my remarks, I will say namaste, and that, one of my understandings of that gesture and that word is that, it's a form of respect and it's a form of greeting, but I'm bowing to you in humility. And then another translation is, I look to see God in you, or the God in me sees the God in you. I don't know where exactly and how that fits with mimetic theory, but I do believe that there's something in that I'm looking to see something in you that you will look to see in me. And if we look to see the God in each other, how will we treat each other differently? And I believe there's something in that that helps us as we think about how can we help, this theory and the understanding of this to make a difference in communities like mine. Thank you, Suzanne.
Oh, thank you, Patty. We really appreciate you being with us and challenging us with those questions, because I think that those thoughts have been on lots of us on our minds, in how do we uh, broaden the mimetic theory to be more representative, to be more inclusive, to be influenced by um, those who have not yet been part of the conversation. And there's a comment in the Q&A from a fellow South Asian, Patty, who says that there is lots of merit in mimetic theory, and it's striking how this conversation is not more diverse. And I think it's the hope that it can be more diverse is what's sort of driving this effort with Unrivaled, but also the conversation tonight in exploring different modes of communicating with folks. So I really, really appreciate you being here. I wish we had more time to talk about all those questions, but those are key questions. They're going to be on our agenda for a long time.